Hey everyone! We're doing a more serious video today. I'd like to talk about The Pianist, both the book and the 2002 film. The film is one of my favorite World War II movies, not just of the last 50 years, but in general. It's a favorite of my mom's as well, and I've wanted to talk about it for quite a long time now, but I also wanted to read the book first. I read the book, finally, in the last month, and so here are my thoughts. The book, originally published in 1946 as Death of a City, is Władysław Szpilman's own account of his struggle to survive World War II as a Jewish pianist in Warsaw, Poland. Szpilman wrote it shortly after the war ended and his life had returned to some semblance of normalcy, though no Holocaust survivor could go back to how things were before the war. Thus, the harrowing details were still very fresh in his mind. The starvation, disease, abuse, and the attempted extermination of the Jews by Hitler's forces. The resulting narrative is a very direct, first-person account unhindered by embellishment and undiminished by time. The book is gripping and honest, with few irrelevant details. It requires no padding because the story of how Szpilman made it out of the war alive is amazing enough on its own. The bulk of the book is Szpilman telling his story, from the war's beginning, to the segregation of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, to his separation from his family, to his survival alone in Warsaw, moving from hiding place to hiding place, until at last the war ended. The climactic moment occurs when he is discovered in an abandoned building by a German officer. This man does not beat him or kill him as he expects. Instead, he asks him to play the piano. Then he gives him some food, he helps him to a better hiding place, and he gives him his coat, thereby saving his life. Szpilman never asked the officer's name for fear that if he, Szpilman, were captured and tortured, he would give away the German's identity. But when they parted and Szpilman found himself with nothing to give as a token of his gratitude, Szpilman gave his own name and mentioned his association with Polish radio, saying that he could be found there should the German officer ever want to get in touch with him. After the conclusion of Szpilman's story, the book gives additional information about this German officer, who was later identified as Captain Wilhelm Hosenfeld. Szpilman said that of all the Germans he encountered throughout the war, Hosenfeld was the only one who was human. A former school teacher with a wife and children, Hosenfeld was shocked and grieved by the atrocities he saw his countrymen committing against the Jews and the Poles, and in turn did all he could to help them, saving many others besides Szpilman. He was eventually captured by the Soviets, and though he tried to contact Szpilman for help, Szpilman and others were not able to get him released, and he died in a Soviet prisoner of war camp in 1952. This reprint of Szpilman's book also gave Hosenfeld an opportunity to tell a little of his own story through certain diary entries in which he expressed his private feelings of horror toward Hitler's regime, the National Socialist Party, and the war. Getting an intimate look at this man's character was both enlightening and tragic, and I'm glad that the editors and Szpilman's son decided to include it. As for the film, well, you don't need me to tell you that Holocaust movies are difficult. There are some very good, important, well-made Holocaust movies out there that I have seen once that I don't think I'll ever feel like seeing again. They're so bleak and hopeless and emotionally draining. But I revisit this one every few years. And this last time, I was very impressed with how faithful the movie stays to the book. Accurate book-to-film adaptations are all too rare, and when the story being told is a true one, I think it's extra important that the movie stick to the facts. This movie is not without a few small changes here and there, but fortunately, none of these has a major impact on the story. Now, this movie was directed by Roman Polanski, who is an extremely controversial figure, as divisive today as he was 16 years ago when this movie came out. Probably more divisive today. I have even considered not talking about this movie, even though I love it, because I don't want to discuss this. I don't want to get into the argument about whether or not he's guilty of statutory rape. I don't want to argue about whether or not it was okay that he won the Best Director Oscar for this movie. I don't want to get into that. I know that in the court of public opinion, he is considered guilty, but I don't know. What I do know is that he made a great movie that I have enjoyed watching numerous times. It's an amazing story of survival and family and kindness and sacrifice. It's heartbreaking, and yet ultimately it is also hopeful. And when I learned that Polanski himself was a Polish Jew who survived the Holocaust and faced certain circumstances similar to those Szpilman went through, I appreciated how personal and important this project must have been for him, and I believe that's evident in the final product. Adrien Brody pulls off a phenomenal performance for which he also won an Oscar. He was dedicated to the part, and it shows in his drastic transformation throughout the film. His condition so deteriorates that he becomes like a wild thing, scrambling for food and hobbling among the ruins of bombed-out buildings. Yet still he plays Chopin silently with his fingers and hears the music in his head. That scrap of humanity cannot be taken from him. The Pianist is not as graphic as some other war movies, especially war movies that are made today, but it doesn't shy away from the violence and brutality and the omnipresence of death. It's R-rated. I think it was the first R-rated film that I was allowed to watch in its entirety, and there are a couple moments that are so shocking that they still take my breath away. My favorite scene in the movie, which should come as no surprise given what I've already said about the book, is the one in which Szpilman is discovered by the German soldier, who is played perfectly by Thomas Kretschmann. His appearance comes so late in the movie, around the 2-hour mark. Yes, this is a long movie, 2.5 hours long, and his screen time is minimal, less than 15 minutes, but his effect is tremendous. Szpilman at this point is so hungry, cold, and exhausted that when he turns and sees the German standing there, he hardly has energy to react. And it's been so long since he's spoken that he's almost unable to communicate. He expects the German to kill him, but instead the German asks him what he does, and when Szpilman replies that he was a pianist, he asks him to play. Szpilman sits down at the piano, and the German listens attentively, and the tension of the moment eases away. The movie stops, and the music takes over. This meeting is an incredibly powerful scene, and I enjoy it even more now that I know more about Hosenfeld and can imagine what was going through his mind as he listened to Szpilman play. I loved the book, and I think reading the book has made me love the movie even more than I did before, which I didn't know was possible. And as a side note, I love the music, which is mostly Chopin and includes one of my favorites, the Nocturne in C-sharp minor, which was the last piece Szpilman performed before Polish radio was taken out, and the first piece he performed when they went back on the air. I enthusiastically recommend both the book and the movie, and if you have any thoughts on The Pianist, I would love to hear them, so go ahead and let me know, and I will see you again soon. Thanks for watching!